Hello, hi everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. It is my pleasure to greet you all today on behalf of the CIWEM Republic of Ireland branch. Thank you for joining us the exciting webinar on the nature-based solution experiences in Ireland, hosted by the CIWEM ROA branch. As we all know, nature-based solutions are gaining increasing importance in addressing some of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time, from climate change to biodiversity loss. Today, we have the privilege of exploring how these NBS approaches can be applied right here in Ireland, where the natural environmental plays such a pivotal role in our lives and ecosystems. Over the next hour, we'll hear from the experts who will share their insights and experiences on the field, offering us a valuable knowledge on how we can incorporate nature's processes and systems into our infrastructure and environmental strategies. If you experience any technical issues and need any assistance, please raise your hand. Use the chat feature on Zoom to let us know what the problem is and what help is required. If you have problems accessing Zoom chat, please use the Q&A chat. So you can use the Q&A facility to put your questions to the speakers and panelists. If we go to the next slide. So some of the general housekeeping, which I would like to touch base here. So this webinar event will be recorded. We'll only put recordings of our events up to the CIWEM website, YouTube, when authors or speakers give us the permission to do so, as long as there is no copyright issues. So you can view the past digital series at this location on the YouTube. If you experience any technical issues or need assistance, please raise your hand, as I mentioned earlier. We will take questions at the end of the presentations. If you would like to put a question or make a comment about the talks, please use the Q&A facility on Zoom. Chat should be for the technical issues with the Zoom only. When asking your question, please state who you are posing the question to. 1 hour of CPD attributed to this webinar. However, we do not provide a CPD certificates for this one, as this is not a CPD accredited training and only applies to the CIWEM members. If you can go to the next slide. So before touching base on the CIWEM, about CIWEM, so I'm just touching base on the CIWEM Republic of Ireland branch. So the CIWEM Republic of Ireland branch is a part of the Chartered Institution of Water Environmental Management, a leading professional body for those involved in water and environment management. The branch represents CIWEM members in the Republic of Ireland, fostering collaboration and providing a platform for networking, learning, and development in water and environmental sectors. So we are about 15 people, more than 15 staff members, dynamic, dedicated group. And I'm really proud that our branch is supported by everybody who works tirelessly to support our members, promote sustainable environmental practices, and coordinate valuable events like today's webinar. So about the CIWEM, CIWEM is a Royal Chartered Professional Body and independent charity. So who we are, CIWEM's mission is to improve water environmental management for the public. We are community of practitioners and visionaries working on issues like adaptation and resilience to climate change, enhancing our built environment and improving our water security. As a UK Royal Chartered Institution charity and professional membership body, we are recognized as independent and a trusted voice on water and environment stage. And we have about 11,000 plus members, more than 57 organizations and universities, 89 nations united by excellence in practice. Next slide, please. So today, before we dive in, I would like to thank our speakers for generously giving their time, expertise, and also to thank all of you for participating in today's session. It is great to see such a strong interest in advancing sustainable solutions here in Ireland. So I would like to introduce the first speaker, Alvin White. So after starting his career in amenity horticulture, Alvin White founded Greenleaf Ireland in 2003 to promote best practice in tree planting and provide technical guidance to landscape architects, engineers, and contractors. Drawing on his practical experience, he has worked on a wide range of projects within Ireland to provide advice and solutions for long-term landscape successes. So I'm just handing over to Alvin White to share his thoughts on the nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sassy, and thank you for everyone for joining. Sassy said, I'm Alvin from Greenleaf, Ireland. I'm best described as a tree enthusiast. I'm a great promoter on what trees can do. I'm a real believer in it, and I think they have a real role in nature-based solutions for SuDS applications. They're doing a huge amount of work for us, but when it comes to nature-based solutions for SuDS, I think they can really help us. And what I'm really interested in is their potential in retrofit installations. So we have a situation here in the Northwest in 2017, August 2017. There was extensive rainfall and flooding. People were out of their houses for years. People had moved back into their houses. 5 years later, we had a very localized downpour, and the same properties were flooded, the same people were impacted. And it's a question of how many times does this happen before it's not a freak incident, and what can we do to actually introduce a solution on site? Because we have these urban locations which we've created, and we can't always actually take up huge areas of hard landscape and replace them with soft landscape. So I think that trees can be a real game changer in being able to take bites out of the runoff from our existing urban locations. When we look at it, we hear about climate change, but what we've actually done is we've actually significantly changed the landscape. So 1,000 years ago, Ireland was covered 80% coverage with deciduous forest. Today, it's about 11%. A lot of that is monoculture. And when we consider what happens when heavy rain falls in the forest, the canopy is intercepting that. The force of the water is broken up. Droplets are brought down smaller. They're dripping off the leaves, they're running down the trunk. It all is slowed down as it comes down through the forest canopy. And when we compare that to what we have in our urban situations, you can see the water is reaching the rivers and streams a lot faster. We've multiplied the speed of the runoff quite considerably. So if we actually are looking at nature and what it can do, we can see that the answer is there. So 1,000 years ago, the same rainfall in Ireland would have been broken up quite considerably by the forest, and today it's running straight in. But so when we actually start looking at it in a way that we can actually model, we can't model the canopy interception because that varies from species to species, and also improves over time as the tree canopy develops. But so we can take that as a plus as the tree matures. But what we can model is what is happening when the water is getting to the ground. And when we look at the tree structure, when we get to the ground, we have this huge plate of roots. Now we've spent the last few decades advocating best practice in urban tree planting, so that people are actually thinking about the volumes that are required for a tree to actually arrive at maturity. And so when the water is coming to the ground, the tree root system itself is helping the water to penetrate, because water penetrates soil typically easiest to the depth of roots. So if we take a core sample on a grassland after a rain event, you'll find that the soil is damp on the surface, but further down in the profile, it's relatively dry. Whereas when we're around a tree, The whole root system is keeping the soil open and uncompacted for the tree's own benefit, but that allows water to penetrate down through the soil. So we can learn from this and transport it into our urban locations. So over the years, we've been advocating a system where we create our soil volume underneath the hard landscapes surrounding. So this is really crucial in urban areas, especially where we have large public squares, where we can't actually devote a large amount of area to soft landscape because we need the hard landscape for people to use. But we can actually get those soil volumes underneath. Now, the beauty is that we can then start to repurpose those same soil volumes that the tree needs into working for us in SuDS. So just included a couple of slides on a test bed, a tree that has been in growing in this type of solution, where the water has been diverted off the surrounding hard landscape into this test bed. And this is a tree after 7 years. You can see around the tree where the root management has been removed, so the roots have been managed away from the surface down into the soil contained in the soil structure system. So that whole soil profile has been kept alive with the tree root activity, keeping it open for the water to be able to penetrate down through it. So where this has been implemented in Ireland, we've hopefully in the link there'll be a little Google Maps link there in the chat for you to see what was in these locations before. So this is a square in Dunleary, Myrtle Square, where the Dunleary and Rathdown County Council Parks and Landscape Department put a lot of effort into redeveloping what was a dilapidated public square, and they've turned it into a wonderful amenity area. So what they did was they retrofitted rain gardens at one side, then the tree pits at the other with a rain garden on top. So the soil volume has been extended out underneath the hard landscape. And then they were taking the runoff as it came across the square down into the lower zone in the trees. So the surface water was coming in the rain garden, and then more water was coming off the gully inlets down into the soil in the tree pits. But what is created, and this is what I find really interesting. So when we consider the 4 pillars of good SuDS, we're looking at what it can do for our water quantity, what it can do for our water quality, and then what it can do for biodiversity, and then for amenity. And you can see in this square here, I absolutely love this square because they've redeveloped it into an area which is fun for families to come and bring children to, and they interact with the play equipment that is there. But they've done a really good job of making it really interesting on the surface while actually dealing with the water runoff. So a wonderful amenity space has been created while also dealing with the runoff on site. This is another little project, and this one is in Dublin, and this is interesting because in this situation, the water has been taken in not through rain gardens, but has been taken off the gully. So this was a long, narrow street in Dublin. Again, there should be a link to the Google Street View on it. As you can see, go back and forward through the history and see what was there before and how the space has been improved by this. So this is a narrow tree pit installed between lines of utilities, and then the water is all taken off the surface, passed down through a granite channel. But again, what I love about this is we've got our soil volume in there. It's taking our water runoff off the street, but we've created a wonderful space that people can actually use underneath these trees. And I love to go down the street and see people congregating and using the public benches underneath these trees on a good day. And so what was interesting, this was one of the requests from the client was that they used the same gully inlet as was used all through the city to make maintenance easy. So the water is all getting channeled off through the granite channel there, and then down through these little cast iron grates down into the tree pit below. So I just want to round off with some numbers. So this is a project that is in planning, hasn't been delivered yet, but we've got the modeling numbers for it. So this is a scheme where it's an active travel scheme where what is proposed is 50 little interventions. So this is a mixture of rain gardens taking the water off the surface. So in this situation, we're not changing the topography at all. We're just, the interventions are being built in the existing streetscape, and then the soil volume is being extended out using the rich space soil modules. So these are BBA certified modules, which we can use with confidence beside carriageways and under pavements. But what is really interesting, when we run the modeling on these interventions, you can see the type of reductions in flow rates that we can get. So this is a sort of interventions that we can do, which give us such a return and reduction that it can't really be ignored any longer. We can't keep on letting these people get their houses flooded out and say there's nothing that can be done. There is interventions that can be done, and it brings wonderful environmental benefits. I'll hand over now to the next speaker.
Thank you, Alvin. Thanks for going through this, and it's really valuable information. And now I invite John Stack, who is our next speaker, and he's a chartered engineer and senior executive engineer in Dublin City Council. While his primary focus is on the Water Framework Directive compliance, he has a particular interest in the multi-benefit use of nature-based solutions, including stormwater management, both in terms of flood control and water quality improvement, habitat enhancement, and for the development of social, recreational, amenity assets. He currently oversees the Water Framework Directive section of the Protection of Water Bodies Office and is tasked with delivering projects aimed at complying with the Water Framework Directive. I now hand over to John to go through his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sassy. Is my screen showing?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much to CIWEM for having me speak. Today, I want to talk about how we make decisions on where we put SuDS and how these decisions come from a more strategic approach to catchment management. So I work for the Protection of Water Bodies Office, and my role really lies around implementation of Water Framework Directive measures and green infrastructure. So my story really starts with integrated catchment management. This is the cornerstone for everything that my office does. It's really about understanding our water bodies in their entirety, identifying sources, pathways, and receptors, and ensuring then that measures are used appropriately. Community engagement is essential, as is a multidisciplinary approach. So I'm an engineer with a bit of science, so I can't claim that I know everything about everything. So I rely heavily on a team of other specialists. Our non-operational measures, I'll say, you know, we do things like misconnection programs and so on, but with regard to our more strategic measures, we're adopting a nature-based solutions approach. I think we have to have a common language in this area. I would start by acknowledging the importance of our green infrastructure and what it provides to us, namely ecosystem services such as clean air, water, pollinators, food, and so on. But ecology has the right to live in its own right as well. I do think we should view green infrastructure the same way as we do our grey infrastructure. So nature-based solutions are really about restoring and preserving our overall green infrastructure. The premise of nature-based solutions is that by restoring natural and modified ecosystems, you can address some of the many societal challenges that we face today, particularly those related to climate change. Next, we have nature-based water retention measures, again with the emphasis on building up our green infrastructure. I think the diagram shows how integrated water is to all of the other environmental and social aspects of our society. And then finally, it brings us to SuDS. These objectives, as defined, I think they really cover the essence of SuDS and nature-based solutions. I think the bottom two are often overlooked when we talk about SuDS. With SuDS, we can place a large emphasis on more of the small interventions and local issues, but I think it's important to have a more strategic picture in mind as well. And I suppose that's the approach that I adopt in my day-to-day work. So this is a hydrograph which shows the relationship between rainfall event and the response of the receiving network or the water body. So it rains, flow in the network or the water body increases to a peak and then it recedes. So from a water quantity point of view, SuDS really is about flattening the peak of this hydrograph, hopefully down to the through flow level. To me, SuDS application, it's a bit like an onion. So because I deal with river catchments, the whole river catchment is the onion, and then each layer that you delve into as you get to the center of that onion is just a reducing scale in the implementation of SuDS. So you have regional, site, and source control. So I'm going to look at the whole onion first and then work my way down to source control. And the whole onion is the River Santry. So it's about 13 kilometers length and it runs along the north of the city. There are myriad pressures on the river. Some of them are environmental and others are societal. And the river itself is a pressure on the North Bull Island Ramsar site, which is internationally important. So the objectives for the river is to address all of these pressures, provide for societal needs, and then to facilitate urban development and regeneration. So again, it all starts with integrated catchment management. So when we carried out a local catchment assessment of the full river, where we identified, classified, and prioritized each pressure on the river. And then we supplemented this with additional reports to build up our justification for the project, really. So what we have now is an urban river restoration scheme covering the entire length of the river. And this was developed with significant community engagement as well. That was a key element of our design approach. So these images compare the existing situation with the potential option from our proposals. So the top images show the existing situation and the bottom images show the potential alternative. The top left, it shows a very wide road with, let's call them traffic calming measurements. They're really chicanes designed to slow down vehicles. Our alternative would be to narrow that road for traffic calming, reduce the total surface of that road, which is generating urban runoff, have that urban runoff discharge into green infrastructure, and then provide pedestrian and cycle access as well. The middle image on the top is a car park. The River Santry actually flows underneath it for about 80 meters. So that 80-meter culvert is a barrier to fish movement. The healthy movement of fish in a river is required in Water Framework Directive. So our proposal again would be to daylight this river, again using nature-based solutions. But while we daylight the river, you now have a space that's far more accessible and usable by people. And then finally, the third image there is just open grassed recreational space. It's actually quite wet and boggy here, so it's not used very much. There's a stormwater sewer underneath it, and our option would be to divert that stormwater sewer through an integrated constructed wetland, which then discharges into the river. Again, these are more images showing the potential of what we can do. And we're working our way through preliminary design at this stage. I think this is probably the most important slide I have today because it shows how SuDS are supposed to function during rainfall. To the uninitiated, it might appear that the bottom set of images shows a catastrophic failure of design. However, this is exactly how SuDS should function. They can become inundated while properties themselves are then protected. From a local catchment assessment, we know that the river restoration on its own is not enough to bring this river back to good status under Water Framework Directive. There are approximately 60 inflows into the river. And we need to address these. And with that in mind, we set out to look at SuDS retrofit schemes into residential housing estates served by those inflows. Now we're at the site control, so we're a slightly lower level of the onion. So the Rainscapes project aims to retrofit SuDS into these estates using the 1 in 100-year design storm and intercepting the first flush. Macaulay Riveline is one of our sites. This is nearing completion now. We have 2 green spaces and 5 cul-de-sacs, and we've retrofitted rain gardens, swales, permeable paving and tree trenches into the estate. We've also incorporated significant wildflower meadowing and amenity needs for people, including park benches and play features and so on. These are some artist impressions of what it could look like, as are these. And then this is one of the cul-de-sacs. So this cul-de-sac is about 20 meters wide and 60 meters long, and there is no vegetation whatsoever in this. And with our vision, it has the potential to look something like this, which I would argue is a far better environment to live in. So construction of this started last October. These images show the excavation of the swale in Macaulay Park. And the next set of images were taken last week, actually, and they show how we've progressed so far. So what I have here is the construction design beside the actual delivered intervention. So this first one here is a completed swale in one of the cul-de-sacs. Obviously, the wildflowers haven't grown yet, etc., because they've only recently been planted. Again, this is another image I've taken. We can see the front, you've got a rain garden. In the middle, you have permeable parking spaces draining into tree trenches. And then at the very top, there will be a rain garden as well. And similarly here, I'm just trying to show how the construction correlates with our design. This is one of the corners of Macaulay Park. Again, we have a long meandering swale through it and play features, etc., etc. We have used turf for now in some of the locations because we know these will have heavy footfall when the site is opened, and we just want to have grass established there. But the vast majority of this site is seeded and wildflowered. This is one of the more complex structures. It's in one of the cul-de-sacs, but again, the image shows each element in our design. And I should point out that this is in that very wide cul-de-sac that I showed a few minutes ago with very little green infrastructure currently. And then this is the long linear park finally. Again, this footpath, there was no footpath along here, and it was quite an unpleasant experience for people trying to get to the bus, etc. So we incorporated this footpath into our design, and beside it then you have a long swale. And then finally, into the center of the onion, we have individual sites. So we've had opportunities to do some pilot studies in schools. Unfortunately, we don't have an annual budget to do this type of work, but some opportunities through grants and things have arisen. To the left, we have 2 green roofs in a school. There's also a control roof in this school, and the students here are monitoring water quantity coming off each roof. And then the images to the right show a rain garden that we developed in another school last year, and it drains a 500 square meter roof. Down the road from this school is an area that periodically floods. So just to finish up, I took this photograph some years ago, and I can't remember if it was in Wexford or if it was in Clare, but it's a crannog, and what it means for me is that, you know, as humans, we have interacted with and depended on water for thousands of years, and we need to continue to do so. So protecting it as a resource is extremely important. And on that note, I will say thank you for having me, and I will stop there. Sorry, that shouldn't have happened. I'll hand you back now. Oh.
Thank you, John, for really valuable insights on the nature-based solutions within Dublin. And I hope the users who are attending the session, so they would find it really, really useful. Yeah, thanks for that. Now I would like to invite the third speaker, third panelist, Anthony McCloy. Anthony McCloy is a director of McCloy Consulting, who specialize in sustainable drainage, flood risk, civil and geoenvironmental consultancy. Anthony is nationally recognized for his contributions in SuDS and has contributed to national and local policy and authored industry guidance. Anthony has an ongoing involvement in the design of innovative SuDS retrofit schemes, flood risk management, and also has a coordinated catchment scale hydraulic modeling studies. So without any delay, I'll hand over to Anthony to go ahead his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the introduction. Thanks also to CIWEM for having me today. My presentation today is probably going to touch upon some of the key points that have been raised earlier by the speakers, but probably adding a little bit more flavor from more of an overarching perspective. So really, I want to look at some of the key issues, some of the key drivers, and some of the key problems that we may have to overcome as we try to mainstream this as just what would we expect in terms of delivered day-to-day business as normal for Ireland. Before we get into the main meat of the subject, drivers, these are the sort of drivers we would expect in terms of flood risk management, improving water quality or using water as a resource, or possibly taking out water out of CSOs and out of the sewer system so we can improve the water quality, what we're trying to protect, and generate that habitat creation. So we know why we're doing it. We have a good sense, and a lot of time as we come to projects from an engineering standpoint, that's generally going to be our approach. The regulatory compliance is another element that, we're not just doing it because we want to, we've been told to do it. We can also introduce cost savings to utility, to regulators, to clients, and possibly even, we find from research that a lot of the housing and residential schemes that have good, well-designed SuDS and water features nearby, it increases the property value. So some of the less tangible aspects are going to be around, the impact it has on us as humans in terms of being in places that are better designed. Alwyn touched upon it in his presentation, this idea of urban renewal. In our cities and towns, we are going through a constant update, and as things get to the end of their design life and as they start to become a bit shabby, we look to provide renewal. So that opportunity for us as an industry gives us the opportunity to integrate water management and to reduce and reverse some of the impacts that our urban runoff has had over the years. So we need to involve the community. We need to see it as an educational resource. I suppose the big one for me, the big challenge we're all going to face in the coming years is climate change and urban adaptation and that adaptation of our urban spaces. We can see that we're getting more frequent extreme rainfall patterns. We are getting more prolonged drought periods. It depends what part of Ireland you're in. Certainly if up in Donegal, they might proclaim that's not the case. But it's up to us in terms of humanity to how we deal with that, and everybody has to play their part. Just want to give some quick reflections on where we are and where we need to get to. I do a lot of work in terms of helping local authorities review schemes and have a lot of interaction with both the industry and people from outside the industry. And I do find there's still a lot of misconceptions out there. The idea that SuDS needs lots of space, that it's always naturalistic, that it's more expensive, that it's difficult to maintain. And from 20 years experience of working in this industry, I just find that a lot of these are being portrayed without any real evidence to stack up behind them. So there is a need to challenge these to say, well, if it is more expensive, where's the evidence it's more expensive? Or if it's land hungry in terms of the SuDS applications, can you demonstrate that it's really well designed and every option has been considered? And whenever we really start to challenge those, we find that it isn't necessarily the case. It's a design issue or it's an institutional barrier. It's not a SuDS issue. So as we move through, I've coined it tail wagging the dog. We need to be really sure in terms of misconceptions that we're not adversely influencing good design by bringing in unnecessary requirements or misconceptions. So that's absolutely critical. And as we get through to actually deliver the schemes, making sure that we do get some degree of site supervision. A lot of the contractors aren't going to be used to delivering these types of schemes, so they need to be held by the hand up to the point where they get to speed, and you can see that they're delivering within the time expected and to the quality expected. On a positive note, schemes are definitely happening. We saw some from John, and I'll see a couple more pictures from me of schemes in Dublin. We can see things happening throughout the country. I wouldn't say it's mainstream yet. It's still got a long way to go, but we are seeing the right types of nature-based solutions being applied, and these types of schemes coming sort of on board in terms of tender requirements and types of specifications being asked for. And part of that that's driving that is the local development plans, the national policy. There's a definite shift, and the language being used is much more towards nature-based SuDS and the national strategies that we'll touch upon. So from my perspective, I think there's lots of opportunistic things happening. I think we could be more strategic in our thinking in terms of where we target the outcomes, and particularly, I mean, coming from north of Ireland, we have a real issue in terms of keeping stormwater out of the combined sewer to facilitate future development. I think the same can be said in parts of Dublin. So we can be more strategic in terms of maximizing the benefits where they're needed most. Just touching upon briefly one of the misconceptions of land being hungry, SuDS being land hungry. It's just a quick sort of mocked up image of we can utilize space that's multifunctional. This is a SuDS basin. It's dry most of the time. If there's a bit of rain, the lower margin will become wet. If there's a more significant rainfall event, part of that will then start to inundate. And then if we get the extreme storm, the whole area will inundate, and that will be out of action for a couple of days as it drains back down again and dries out. But it's serving that function in terms of cost. It's low cost because it's only landscaping. In terms of maintenance, it's typical landscape maintenance. So from those aspects, it's a really good example that we need to challenge misconceptions and use space that's multifunctional across the whole area of the site, not just in the corner where we try to pipe all the water to a pond. Just touch upon this scheme in North Dublin, John's been referred to. We were involved in the design of it in terms of that delivery, in terms of stakeholder engagement. And there's a lot of really important learning outcomes from that in terms of how do you get the community on board, how do you keep them on board, how do you get different NGOs and other groups around the community to interact, because this is a respect that we're going into existing landscapes, existing developments that people use on a daily basis, and anything we bring can't just be about trying to solve a problem elsewhere. It needs to be improved in that local landscape, because there is going to be a degree of disruption. There's going to be a degree of just nuisance during the sort of 6, 12, 18-month period while things are being constructed. So with that, we have the opportunity to bring in things that are relatively low cost, but add real value to that local community. So that need to get it right. We need to understand the needs of that local community and local stakeholders. The communication. One of the key learning outcomes I've had in my career is as soon as there's a mention of water anywhere in the landscape, be it 1 inch or 6 feet, there's a perceived risk of drowning. We design these things to be mostly dry. It will hold water from time to time, and that's where they're meant to, as John was explaining. And that needs to be communicated that these are inherently safe, and they provide a bit more interaction within the environment, so we can interact with the rainfall whenever it's there, and that should be seen as a positive, not a negative. So really it's all about enhancement. How do we enhance? So you can see the image on this slide shows a lot of play features, a lot of nature-based play on the way features in terms of stepping stones that go through where the water profile might be. Now, if a kid falls in and wets their feet or wets their, he may well get a clip around the ear from the parent, but that's part of education, that's part of growing up. So just a couple more images on Macaulay Park, just to give you a sense of that construction phase. Is really critical to get the right contractor to make sure they're well versed in landscape contracting and how to deliver that type of scheme. So you can see here the level of profile and the work has been done is really tidy. It's understanding this isn't a major civils project with lots of concrete, that it is working with soils and ensuring there's no real compaction and just an understanding of the environment they're working in. So just flicking through, and then you see the final product. And that one, again, this is just establishment. As John was saying, there's going to be more wildflowers and different species of vegetation take hold here. You would expect in the wetter parts of the system, you will get colonization of wetland planting, or sorry, colonization of wetland species. So it's an understanding, make sure that we incorporate that into the design and communicate that to the residents. Just touching on the national strategy that was released last year. So it is a real focus on catchment management towards nature-based, and there's targets set that the rainwater management plans, so we've written some guidance around that each local authority should have one of those completed by 2027, which is just around the corner, literally. So it's looking at not just, as John was describing, the onion layers. It's not just looking at a particular site, it's looking at the wider catchment and how do we look to get more strategically aligned with dealing with the problems around climate change, but looking at both retrofit and new build and how does that all link together. So expanding out into the catchment, this is a scheme we did a few years back now up in Donegal, Clonmany, where the downstream village was prone to flooding due to the very spatey flow and flashy flow from the upland hills and the inside channels of the watercourses. So for that, there was a number of leaky dams. There's about 60 to 70 big chunky leaky dams that slow the water down through the watercourse. So it's not just about what we do in our urban environment, it's looking at the wider catchment. So in this image, you can see the amount of tailwater and backwater behind each dam and the amount of active storage that's bringing on board. So this is really not just about one big scheme in one location. It's lots of little schemes in multiple locations and having that cumulative impact, but very much where we can, having that focus on blue-green infrastructure. Where we're working on wider catchment is very much focused on the landowners, that they're not, we're not destroying their lands. It's here to enhance and contribute to wider catchment with the ability to not impede their activities and what they're doing. So just to summarize, it's about the whole catchment. It's not just about a problem area. It's about looking at, where can we deliver solutions? How can we work interdepartmentally and also work with wider stakeholders to deliver maximum outcomes? If we are delivering something that is maybe solving a flood problem, can we also do urban renewal? Can we bring in introduce play? Can we do other things that aren't necessarily an engineering focus, but give the overall co-benefit and add the overall value? So I think one of the key things we probably need to see as an industry is how do we value nature-based solutions just beyond the monetary cost of installation? How do we value that in terms of health and well-being and the other benefits it brings in? So we need to be more strategic, but also look at interventions that can be delivered here and now. Thank you very much.
It's really great. Yep. Thanks. Thanks, Anthony. Thank you to Alwyn, John, Anthony, and Kerenja for an interesting discussion, and the CIWEM Republic of Ireland branch for organizing this event. And definitely it's a big support from the CIWEM HQ, which has made this webinar successful. I would like to open the floor for any Q&A. Any participant would like to ask any questions? I can see some Q questions were raised in the Q&A session, Q&A chat. I can ask. So there is one interesting question for John. As an expert, how do you see our views or your views on the discharge of TSE water and recycled water to the river body?
I suppose that depends on what your interpretation of treated sewage effluent. In Ireland, all of our treatment plants are licensed and they must meet criteria under the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. But, you know, we have CSOs spilling into our rivers all of the time. That can't continue. So if you'd ask me, what do I think about treated sewage effluent being discharged into our river courses, it comes back to a legislative requirement. You can't cause a deterioration in a water body. So if you want to discharge this effluent, it has to be treated to the necessary standard. And like, so actually, let's come back to that even a little further. We're now encountering things in our treated effluent that we've not seen before, and we don't have treatment mechanisms for, like endocrine disruptors, microplastics, all of these things. They're not generally treated in our treatment plants, and that will have to change.
Yeah, another question for you, John. What was the public consultation phase like for the sanitary works?
So that's a very important thing for me. When I wrote the tender for that project, there was a requirement in that before any any design work took place, stakeholder engagement commenced first. So within a month of the contract being signed, we had organized a series of stakeholder engagement events throughout the catchment. We spoke to several hundred people. The majority of them were school children, to be quite honest. And we explained what our vision was for the project and what they would like to see as part of this scheme. And every single comment that we received was mapped and geolocated to a point on the river. And that all those comments have gone into the design pot. And annually, we go back out and update the stakeholders as part of this project. We've done far more engagement than is, statutorily required. We haven't even entered statutory consultation processes yet, and we've spent 3 years consulting with people. So I think by front loading all this engagement, we'll actually streamline the planning process down the line, because it doesn't come as a shock to people and they feel they've been heard and they've had their input. I think Anthony made reference to this as well.
Yeah, I think just as an aside on that, you always find one or two detractors who will object to anything you put forward, even though it's an enhancement. And I found that over the past it's more inertia. They just don't like change, don't like any change happening in their local environment. So we have to find ways of circumnavigating that. And if there's the will of the people in terms of 99% want it to happen, we can't be taking the voice of the one naysayer. I think that's really, really important, how we get past that and how we value the overall positives of the project.
That's really great. Yep. Thanks, John, and thanks, Anthony. I have a question for Alvin. How such plantation will replenish the groundwater?
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends on the subsoil type or whatever the buildup is underneath. So when the water goes through, we usually generally try to get at least 600 mil of soil depth, so that the water has time to slow down as it goes through, and that dwell time allows organic matter, things to be filtered out, which is then broken down by the bacteria. But it is a question of where you're actually locating these SuDS features, because if you're alongside a busy carriageway with a lot of heavy dynamic loads, it's not necessarily always the best thing to have water getting discharged out onto the carriageway buildup because of hydraulic pumping. So in those situations, we would quite actually often tank the whole pre-pit so that the water is actually contained, and then sub-drain it out. And in that case, it can be used as part of as a drainage chain. So we've got sites where the trees will take the water in first, and then it will be passed on then into swales. So it just depends on the actual application and the location of where those trees are going in, whether it is actually a good idea to do groundwater discharge with them as well.
Thanks, Alvin, for that. Anthony, there is a question for you. Are there any financial incentives in Ireland to encourage uptake of nature-based solutions by farmers or local authorities?
John, you might want to help me in this one. I'm not aware of any ones directly. I mean, well, I'll tackle this from a different scenario. In England, there are financial incentives. Natural England have programs in place where landowners can look at, repairing riparian zones. They can introduce leaky barriers. They can do different things on land, and they'll get a financial reward for that. I'm not aware of any similar framework of brokerage in Ireland, but I think it's a really good idea and worth exploring. On that scheme in Donegal, the landowners were facilitating by allowing the leaky dams on their land, but they were not financially rewarded. Their outcome was to be seen in a good light by the local community downstream that they were helping to protect. So I'm not aware of any, but John, you may correct me on that.
No, I think you're fairly correct there. There's no direct funding available that I'm aware of anyway. But then bear in mind, I work in urban catchments, not rural catchments, so I might be wrong on this. I think there can be assistance under the cap if you're a farmer and you're trying to do works. But then we also have LawPro, which is the local authorities water program, and they have a grant system annually. So if there are projects, community-based projects around improving water, they have a grant scheme for that. No, it's competitive. You must make an application. But that's probably the only one. But as Anthony said, this needs a whole area of exploration because it makes sense.
Yeah. The LawPro is one I would be aware of as well, but yeah, it has to particular outcomes, and it's not massive funding, and it is fairly competitive even to get hold of that money. There was an interesting question there around maintenance, which I think is also really important in terms of designing these from all the speakers today. I mean, designing with maintenance in mind has to be at the forefront of the actual design and how we design it. We generally design it to be landscape maintenance. So, whether that's just amenity grass that's flat or undulating as part of a slope, we should be able to, but we have to be ecologically sensitive in terms of how that maintenance. So it might go from 5 cuts per year to actually, we're just going to leave that area rewild to a point and only trim after right at the end of the growing season, where a lot of the flora and fauna have all done their thing and go into hibernation. So I think from a maintenance point of view, to get the full benefit from nature-based solutions, we need to be a lot more ecologically thinking in terms of how we do our maintenance. A lot of maintenance is relatively straightforward. It's no different to landscape maintenance per se, but it's when we do it and how we do it.
Yeah, I would agree there. The Rainscapes project is a pilot project that aims to answer all the questions that SuDS raised in Dublin City Council, and maintenance is one of them. But we envisage that they won't require a huge amount of maintenance. So for us, it's a question, do outlets get blocked and how do we clear those? We hope local communities will take on some of that role, that if they're just walking past one of our installations and they see a load of leaves on top of an outlet, they'll just sweep them away. I've seen that in practice on the continent. Then you'll have things like littering. Who's going to pick up the litter? Nature-based solutions, swales and things tend to, litter tends to accumulate in those. There's that. Then there is the maintenance of the vegetation. And then, as Anthony mentioned, lawn cutting. So as part of the contract, the contractor and their landscapers, have to hand us a maintenance protocol at the end. And we will learn from that then. But within our own organization, the hydraulic maintenance will be managed by my office. We're still discussing who's going to look after the rest.
Okay. I think the last question is for all the speakers. Do you have any acceptable solutions in applying SuDS in narrow roads in urban environments?
Change them to all cycle lanes, and then you have plenty of opportunity. I think it sort of comes back to Owen's presentation and the idea that everything does not necessarily have to be at the surface. I think the more constrained you get, the harder and more challenging the solution becomes. But that's not to say there's no solution. There will be opportunities. You always find little pockets of land. We're doing some work in very challenging landscapes at the minute. We're looking at, very narrow raised rain planters along the building edge. We're looking at other ways to stop water getting onto the highway. And sort of, if you think about a typical narrow roadway, a lot of the runoff that receives is not necessarily the roadway. It's coming off the roofscapes and the roofs that are pitched and fall onto it. So if you can intercept that and stop that getting onto the highway, you may well have taken off at least 50% of the runoff. So I think we need to be a bit more innovative and open-minded to opportunities in those really constrained areas.
Yeah, I would agree there. And we've looked at some sites in our city centre, and it really comes back to where is the water coming from, and what can we do with the space we have. So again, intercepting roof is critical. But I would also be asking, what are you trying to achieve from the SuDS? Are you trying to slow down the rate at which water flows, in which case you can look at permeable paved surfaces, or are you looking at complete soakage into the ground, which you may not have? So again, there's no straightforward answer to that question. I think that question elicits further questions as part of your design process, to be quite honest.
Any views from Alvin?
Yes, I concur with Anthony there. In small constrained areas, it's a bit like the concept of the aggregation of marginal gains. If you can do a multiple of little small interventions, such as planters and a tree and a small rain gardens here and there where you have space, it all multiplies up to actually make it a real impact on the overall runoff, and even just in the slowing down of the runoff getting the drainage network. So it all does depend on space, but you can do small interventions, and a multiple of those will give you the result that you need.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I think the webinar is coming to close, and there are some things which I just wanted to touch base on the CIWEM events. CIWEM ROI is hosting on PFAS on the 1st of May. So you will see shortly on the booking page, and there is another event, in-person event from CIWEM Republic of Ireland branch and Engineers Ireland on the 9th May 2025, where CIWEM president is coming to Dublin, and Engineers Ireland CIWEM ROA branch is hosting a conference in the Engineers Ireland branch. If we look at other CIWEM events, so date for your diary, that's on the 8th May, CIWEM Northern Ireland branch annual dinner in person. And bookings are open for the Flood and Coast Conference and exhibition in 2025. So it's between 3rd and 5th. 4th April, it's a Be Flood Ready, different approaches to deliver property flood resilience. And 8th April, in 2 weeks' time, West Midlands, East Midlands Presidential Team, CIWEM Presidential Conference 2025, the Ripple Effect. That's again in-person event. And I would like to thank everybody who made their time and presenting the nature-based solutions. And thank you for everyone joining the webinar. And the final is the CIWEM Learning and Development. Participant can go through the link and CIWEM policy and a couple of CIWEM publications, Journal of Flood Risk Management, the Environment magazine. So participant can refer to it. And I would like to thank all the speakers and panelists and the participants who have actively participated and making this webinar a great success. Thank you, everyone.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.